If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What strange thing have you witnessed/experienced that you cannot explain? I come from a pretty devout Catholic home. When my brother was very young, he was diagnosed with leukemia. One night in the early morning hours, he was woken up by 3 shadow people looking directly over his bed. He described them with a purple hue. And they didn't disappear for a while. He was petrified but eventually got back to sleep. In the morning he told my mom about it. And she assured him that they were just angels protecting him and helping him heal. This made us both feel better and we believed her. As far as I know, he never saw them again. Many years later I learned this scared the crap out of my mom. And she started putting holy water on both of us every night and splashing it throughout the house. Weird stuff has happened in this house my whole life. People have always been very uncomfortable in our basement. He and his girlfriend lived down there for a while. When we got older, there's something that went on down there that he doesn't talk about, as he doesn't want to freak me out cause I still live here. His girlfriend also got the worst sleep paralysis of her life here. Lights used to flicker on and off, and there was a very bad Ouija board experience here. I'm getting horrible goosebumps and chills writing this, as I still live in that same house today and I'm literally sleeping in the same room, 2 feet from where he saw them. In the summer I sometimes volunteer as a cabin leader at a summer camp for youth, some of whom are troubled. Last summer we had a kid who got random fits of rage and he would take it out on anything he could. We later found out he had hid his meds from the staff nurse because he came on a bus without any guardians. Obviously this withdrawal had major side effects. His fits started to get more and more extreme, and one day during the daily nap time he erupted at full force and started breaking everything he could and ran out of the cabin, and I was sadly the only person there at the time due to a staff meeting that was occurring. I called another cabin leader who was in the cabin next to ours and he ran out to find the camper because at this point my whole cabin of about 10 kids were panicking and worried, so I felt uncomfortable leaving them alone. During and after the fit, a few of my heavier sleepers stayed asleep, and about 5 minutes later one of them woke up crying and screaming. Most young boys have a sort of pride issue with crying in front of other boys their age, so he asked if he could talk to me along on the cabin's porch. I agreed and walked him out, telling the other campers to try to go back to sleep. He ended up telling me that he was having a nightmare about a skeleton. He didn't say much else about the dream because that wasn't the bad part. The bad part was that he ended up describing to me what was essentially sleep paralysis. I told him about it and he had no idea what it was and was begging me to call his mom to come get him because he said he felt like something was there trying to get him. I ended up researching sleep paralysis with him and showed him everything I could to assure him that nothing was out to get him and explained the science behind it. Here's where it gets weird and still freaks me out to this day. We later had a staff meeting for those who missed the earlier one, and I found out that while all of this was happening, another boys' cabin and a girls' cabin on the other side of camp each had a camper wake up with sleep paralysis, both describing different nightmares, both having to do with a skeleton. I also later had found out that the cabin leader who had went looking for our runaway camper had found him in a grove of trees talking what he called gibberish. And he was hitting a stick against a tree. We called his parents, who explained his situation in more detail, and we found out about him hiding the meds, and we got him calmed down and the rest of the week went smoothly. After he left we ended up finding a small drawing pad we had seen him using throughout the weeks with very strange drawings in it. Nothing looked like anything, there wasn't anything graphic or anything about them that was threatening. But for some reason it just seemed unsettling to us all. Almost like the drawings extremely young children do when they scribble. We called his parents and we offered to ship it to them, but they said he didn't want it. A more skeptical cabin leader ended up burning it because of the situations that happened in the week. I don't really get scared by supernatural stuff, but this was honestly the weirdest/scariest thing I've ever seen my entire life, and I wouldn't even believe it had I not witnessed it myself, and the horror in everyone's faces that were involved. Okay, I have a good one. This was about 7 years ago. I was around 17 and had just got my license and was driving back from church on a sunny Sunday afternoon with my 11-year-old brother in the passenger seat. It was still very light out. We were on a highway, small town, but the busiest road in it, right as it crossed into some residential areas, so the speed limit was dropping. I looked to the right, already slowing down to see what the speed limit was as I was a new driver. For some reason as I looked at the sign, a couple of girls knocking on the front door of a small white house only about 50 feet behind the sign caught my eye. They looked to be in their mid-teens. I couldn't see their faces, but they had brown skin and long, thick, dark, curly brown hair almost to waist level in normal-looking clothes. The house sits at an angle on the street, so I couldn't see into the door frame. I just saw that it opened. As soon as it opened, the hair on the heads of both of these girls shot straight up into the air, as if they were flipped upside down, and so one was shaking them back and forth. I only caught a glimpse for a couple of seconds, but I had their wherewithal to shout to my brother to look. He looked over and we both started laughing hysterically at how bizarre it was. I'm so glad I did that, because if not, I honestly am not sure if I'd still believe I saw what I did. It wasn't till the next day when we realized it was actually creepy. Their hair appeared so thick that the only thing I could imagine having done that would be a mega strong giant fan under the porch that turned on as soon as the door opened, which of course makes no sense. It was not a windy day and isn't a windy part of Washington. I don't live at home anymore, but every time I visit my parents, I wonder about that house and tell myself to go and knock on that door and ask whoever is in there about what I saw. Got a family now, so probably never will. In this university I used to go to, we have extracurricular activities wherein sometimes we're required to sleep over in the campus to catch up on some deadlines for an event. So around 12 midnight, people started going to sleep while I pretended to go to sleep, because I do not want to be up all night chatting with friends, like what the rest usually do. About around an hour after, I overheard friends talking about going to the nearby bakery, it's open 24 hours a day, to grab some midnight snacks. I didn't bother joining them, but somehow my insomnia kicked in and I just couldn't sleep no matter how tired I was. So then I decided to join them, but I was already left behind. I went out alone and it was really dark with barely street lights on. At the end of the block, I had to take a turn to dark alley because that's the only path leading to the bakery. There was this strange humanoid figure with big bat-like wings just swaying in the wind, real-life Batman? On top of the building right in front of me. Right when I was directly under it, a strong gust of wind blew towards me vertically from above. It was kind of like screeching this quah-quah sound. For the first time, and maybe last time, in my life, I felt this cold rush of fear in my spine, like my entire body was screaming run like hell. I panicked and ran as fast as I could. When I caught up to my friends in the bakery, they asked me why do I look I saw hell or something. Thinking that no one would believe me anyway, I just said that nothing happened. After that, one of them brought up that they heard this quah-quah screeching sound coming from this dark building. I didn't tell them that I saw it though. That was about 8 years ago. Sometime after that, I would hear similar stories from other students describing the same thing. The event I'm about to share occurred when I was 6 or 7. I don't remember for sure. Partially because as a kid, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. Today, I'd never forget how old I was or even what I was wearing. This is undoubtedly the most unexplained event I've ever experienced. I'm 22 now, so this occurred around 15 years ago. I sincerely believe that this was around Easter. I know for sure it was a Monday night and we very well may have been eating leftovers, because my dad and I were taking the garbage cans to the end of my grandparents' driveway. Their garbage pickup has always been on Tuesday, so that's my assumption. My dad's head was down as he was pulling the garbage can, but mine was looking up at the sky. I said, "Dad, what is that?" He looks up and his face just turned white, and the older I got, the more I realized why. In the sky, literally no more than a mile above our heads were 3 huge asteroids. Space rocks. Whatever you want to call them. 1 mile. I could see the craters in the asteroids. This was after dark. I don't live in a very populated area, but there are some parts that are lit up. These rocks were so illuminated I could see every last detail of each one. The rocks formed the shape of a triangle. The big one leading at the front, a medium-sized one in the bottom left, and a smaller one on the right of that. I would say the biggest one had a diameter that was the size of a football field, maybe bigger. I don't remember that perfectly. Naturally, fear took over. If these things were heading towards Earth, there was no doubt we'd be killed. That's what my dad's initial thought likely was. But they weren't falling. They were floating. Hovering. Flying. Inside the atmosphere, clearly, and gravity had no effect on them. They just kept turning, the back 2 over the front, and the front over the back. Each one spinning individually and all rotating symbiotically. I can't talk about this with my dad, the one person who was there with me, because he still struggles with what happened. The people I do tell think it's a joke. But what they don't know is this has kept me up at night for the last 16 years. I can't walk outside in the dark by myself. I sprint. I have no idea what it was. I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if I'll ever want to. My 3-year-old nephew walked by my room while I was playing computer, definitely noticed it out of the corner of my eye. My sister was in the bathroom getting ready using the mirror. She called out his name, and then walked into my room and asked if I saw him. I said yes, then remembered he was with our parents. We went into the room. We both saw a small humanoid walk into and noticed the balcony door wide open. We lived on the 18th floor and never used the private balcony. We both pretty much agreed to pretend it didn't happen. Typing this gave me the goosebumps. I'd normally chalk it off as just my eyes playing tricks on me, but I turned my head as I saw it walk by, and my sister clearly heard it walk by her, enough to have her think it was her son and call his name. She had thought maybe our parents had come back already, but nope. Just us and whatever the hell that thing was. Actually, as I was typing this, I also remember 2 other things that had happened while we lived there. One night I was sleeping and I heard a really weird sound I can only describe as a ray gun. A sound increasing in frequency and pitch, and sounded a little bubbly, if that makes sense. Right after I heard it, my room lit up with a green light for maybe half a second and then went away, almost as if something had pointed a spotlight right at my window. My sister also told me she saw this one night, and when she looked out the window she saw it at another apartment building maybe 200 meters away. By it I mean just a green light shining at an apartment, apparently coming from nothing. Yeah, only weird things to ever happen to me or anyone I know. I don't believe in ghosts. I think aliens are definitely out there, but just not here. I have no explanation for what I experienced. My friend and I used to love to go and hang out in one of the local cemeteries. I guess because we were just weird. This was an older cemetery and was no longer used, so it didn't have any new graves in it. One day while we were hanging out and just wandering around, we stumbled upon a new looking grave marker. It stuck out like crazy because all of the other markers were old and gray and crumbling. On some of them you could barely make out the names. This marker was much newer and the name and dates was clearly visible. It was also a rather neat red marble color, which was really different from all of the others. We didn't think much of it and just continued our trip through the cemetery. We sat down under this big tree in the middle and talked and laughed and did other stupid kid things. After an hour or so we decided it was time to leave. We crossed right by where the new grave marker had been and it was gone. We both kind of freaked out a little bit and searched the whole graveyard looking for the brand new marker, and it wasn't there. We checked for it several more times on different visits and never found it again. It was just weird and something neither of us could ever explain. When I was a teenager we went to our local cemetery to visit our granddad's grave. On the way back to the car I saw one of those little white crosses on a grave, the kind you put on before you get a headstone. The horizontal but with the name had fallen off onto the grave. I felt bad seeing it, so I picked it up and put it back onto the cross. That night, I woke up and at the end of my bed I saw a guy sitting in a chair with his head thrown back. His throat looked like it was cut or something. It was an awful mess. He had brown hair, a blue shirt and jeans on. I was absolutely terrified and screamed out for my parents. They came into the room and had gone. I haven't touched anything in a graveyard since. This is more WTF than scary strange. My wife was making spaghetti and needed sausage for the sauce. Me and my son go to the local grocery store to buy it. Now there are 2 stores in my little town. One is a nice new chain with overinflated prices and the other looks like something from the 70s. Dirty floors, bad lighting, and poor selections. It's depressing and a little creepy. But this is where we go. There is hardly anyone there, as always, and we head straight to the meat cooler in the back of the store. They don't have what my wife wanted, but there is a red button to call the butcher. I pushed the button and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then over the intercom we hear, "Mrs. Sausage, please come to the front." Mrs. Sausage to the front. My son starts laughing and asked if they are calling me Miss Sausage. I was equal parts amused and irritated. I'm a man, by the way. Then a door near the meat department swings open and out comes the manager. I've seen him before and he, just like this store, looks like something from the 70s. Brushed back hair, big mustache, 3 buttons on his shirt unbuttoned, gold chain, think of a redneck John Travolta. He walks to about 10 feet from us, stops, points at me and starts laughing. Then a customer comes from an aisle pushing a buggy and they both start laughing together and pointing. They were looking at each other and then back at me and my son. Laughing and laughing. It was weird to say the least. We just walked away and drove to the other store. I'd been wandering around St. Augustine late at night with a few friends, and could have sworn I saw a dog ahead of us. It was still there, but they couldn't see it. About as big as a Great Dane, and the coat was dark, but seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. It took off and they still didn't notice it. I've never had a history of hallucinations, nor have I used any substance beyond tobacco, and I didn't smoke yet back then. The weirdest part is a few weeks later, same area, different group, I saw it again, and again, they didn't see it. Except this time, it was a small pack, probably about 4. Something felt really off though, like I was being watched by something malicious. Haven't seen it since that night, but whenever I go down St. George Street under a full moon, even on crowded nights, something just feels seriously wrong. This community center I work for was on the edge of an old cemetery. There was a big tree that people like to say people were hung from, but I don't believe that. The area is well known for Civil War activity, so I wouldn't be surprised if the area the building sat on had seen its share of death. Anyways, I don't believe in ghosts, but one night after closing up and doing a walk to make sure the building was empty, locking all the doors, etc., we were setting the motion detector alarm when we heard two young girls giggling down the hallway. Me, my supervisor, and my coworker all looked at each other, looked down the hallway, and back at each other. Supervisor said, "Anyone want to check on that?" We both said nope, set the alarm and left. One of the janitors one time came running up to the front desk after close and begged us to stay and leave with her. She swore up and down that while she was cleaning a woman screamed in her ear. She since that refused to go down a certain hallway once the building was closed. One supervisor said she'd often see a guy in an old suit and tall hat sitting in the chairs by the admin offices when she was doing rounds. A coworker who didn't believe in ghosts either said he saw a guy that fit that description in a reflection of the door window in that same wing after close. Like I said, I don't believe in ghosts and I'd like to keep it that way, so after the laughing kids I refused to leave the front after we closed. When I was about 15, maybe 16 years old, I went to a haunted house for Halloween with some friends. This particular haunted house is very popular throughout the US for being full contact as well as being truly haunted. It was featured in some ghost hunting show also. Actors dressed as doctors walked around outside screwing with people and would also sometimes put a bag over their head and would drag them inside and put them in random spots. I was one of those lucky enough to be kidnapped. I was placed in a room bag still over my head, and after waiting maybe a minute or two to be sure the doctor left, I took the bag off. Seeing a faint, what I thought was just my brain playing tricks on me, shadow of a little girl. I rubbed my eyes because again I thought I was just hallucinating. My eyes came back to and I could see the figure of the little girl a little more clearly. I freaked out and ran out of the room screaming. Altogether I give Asylum 49 and 9/10. My brother and I were walking on a wooded property in rural Iowa that my grandpa rented for cattle. We've been there many times through our childhood, and know it like the back of our hands. That day seemed strange, almost eerie. It was overcast and oddly quiet. We were walking through a clearing and we heard a tree branch make a loud crack, but it didn't break, and saw it shaking as we heard a loud thud hit the ground. Something took off running on two legs and had a long monkey-like tail. It was probably around 54 foot tall, just enough that the head and tail barely cleared the weeds it was running through, and it hauled ass. We both looked at each other and said WTF. We thought anyone we'd tell would think we were absolutely insane. Well, we decided to mention it to my grandparents since it was the land they kept their cattle on, and without blinking an eye they told us they believe there is a monkey out there. They pulled up on a dog in a ditch near there walking weird, and my grandma said it stopped and turned its head and had very humanoid features. It was all black but with a more skin tone face. She said it startled the hell out of them, but then it took off. Haven't seen it before or since then. I don't think it has anything to do with Bigfoot or anything crazy, and I have a hard time believing someone had a pet monkey that they let loose and being able to survive the winters and such, so I'm not sure what the hell we saw. When I was young and revisited my country of birth, I was told to not look into the well in the yard. Naturally, I looked into the well when no one would see me and discovered nothing. I soon became very ill for some time. The normal doctor couldn't figure out what was wrong, so my family brought in the town witch doctor. She took a ball of wax, flattened it, and held it above a candle. The wax began to melt and create shapes on its surface, which she interpreted as me looking into the well, scaring the dwarves/gnomes who lived there, and cursing me for disrespecting them. I had told no one that I had peered into the well. After, she gave me the disc of wax and told me to place it under my pillow when sleeping, and I recovered quickly after. I later asked my family why no one else got sick when they took water from the well, and they told me it's because they would say, "Excuse me," as is the superstitious tradition to avoid being cursed for disturbing the dwarves/gnomes. One time when I was away on holiday with my family, we were staying in a cottage in Whitby, UK. It was our last full day and my aunt and uncle were coming to visit, have dinner, and stay over. I was showering and felt a quick sharp rush of hot air against the side of my face. It hurt and was so sudden I thought a pipe must have burst in the wall and steam was rushing out of a crack in the tiles. But when I whipped my head around to see, there was nothing. This sounds completely stupid, but it was only at this point my brain clicked that it wasn't just a random hissing sound, but more like a hoarse whisper that had said my name, "I'm called Beth," and the sound was like a really quick Beth. So obviously I lose my shit and run downstairs stark naked to my mum, telling her what happened. She got me a towel and calmed me down, but was kinda dismissive, which upset me because it felt like she didn't believe me. Anyway, fast forward to my aunt and uncle arriving, I tell them the story, and when I'm done my dad turns to my mom and asks if she wants to tell the rest of it. My mom is shooting daggers with her eyes telling him to shut up. Eventually she tells me that the night before this happened she'd been half awake half asleep in bed, drifting off, dreaming about this evil old woman standing in the cobbled street outside our holiday cottage, staring up at the windows. She said she didn't have any features as such, but she knew she was a woman and she just felt evil. I'm pretty sure she used the phrase radiating malevolence, which sounds really extra, but I got what she meant. Anyway, she said the dream only went on for a few seconds before she was woken up by a rush of hot air against her face, which whispered Beth really loudly in her ear. Full disclosure, I was 18 at this point, and I 110% slept in my parents' bed that night. I was around 15 and I was visiting a concentration camp in Germany, near Berlin, called Sachsenhausen. I had visited Auschwitz previously and of course it was horrifying, but it didn't impact me much. Sachsenhausen was just a work camp, but what happened to me there terrifies me to this day. I was with a few friends and we entered the building used for medical experimentation. It was a small building with 2 surgical tables in the back room and a set of stairs to the left. I didn't read the information board, just looked around, and then a friend and I ventured down the stairs. The instant my foot hit the floor of the basement I burst into full-on sobbing tears and felt the most intense panic of my life. It was just a small room covered in white tiles all over with a few drains in the floor. After running back upstairs and then outside, I asked a friend to check the information board and tell me what that room was. Turns out it was where they kept all the dead bodies. Never felt anything like that in my life, before or since. Not mine, but my mother's story. When my mom was younger, she and her cousins were all playing outside in the front yard while her aunt, my grandaunt, and her mom, my grandma, sat on the porch talking. They lived in a small neighborhood that sat in a little holler only accessible by one road. And that one road came up a steep hill before feeding into the holler. So from their house, a few hundred feet away, they could see that road and anyone coming up it and into the holler. So, back to the story, she said she was the first to notice it. She looked up, and there was a big white hairy thing coming up the road, right at the mouth of the holler. Imagine a tall man wearing a polar bear costume. She mentions it and her cousins notice it too, and then finally my grandma and grandaunt notice it. Immediately, they rushed down into the yard and dragged the kids back inside the house. My mom said she and the other kids were mostly confused and were just curious about what the white hair thing was, but that my grandma and grandaunt were scared. They were looking out the window and watching it and telling the kids to stay quiet and say nothing. Eventually, the white hair thing lumbers up to the porch and stumbles around for a bit, sort of like it's trying to see if there's a way to get inside the house or not. It's just observing the house, but never touched anything. Just stumbled around and would get really close when looking at things. My mom describes the way it walked as a human trying to travel on all fours. It goes right down the uncanny valley, and you can't tell what the hell it is. Anyway, while it's doing this, my grandma and grandaunt pull the curtains to and they stop looking out the window. They wait for a while, then when they look back out the window, they see it lumbering away back out of the holler, down the road. Scariest thing is that my grandma and grandaunt absolutely refused to talk about it the rest of the day when the kids tried bringing it up. They'd get very angry, and so the kids eventually stopped asking. That was about 30-something years ago, in the mid-80s. My grandaunt died a long time ago. But anytime my mom brings it up to my grandma just pretends like she doesn't remember that it ever happened. My mom has no idea what she saw as a kid. But whatever it was, 30-something years later, my grandma still won't talk about it. And I think this story tops any scary thing I've ever personally experienced. I recall being in high school and at a party. The house was pretty nice and had a window in the basement to the pool. It was late and dark out, so the pool lights were on, giving you this large blue window. Everyone was in the basement for a while when out of the corner of my eye I catch a woman jump into the pool and hover in front of the window. She had this long flowing white dress on that swirled around her as she looked in. When I turned to look at her, she was gone. Literally happened in the blink of an eye and gave me that uneasy WTF feeling. So I start to look around the room for a TV or something that could have reflected on the glass, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I see a girl staring at the window on the other side of the room. She was closer and her body was facing the window. The expression on her face matches the feeling crawling up my back. I walk straight toward her and start asking, "Did you just see?" But she finishes the sentence with a woman in a white dress in the pool. The uneasiness went from a crawl to a fiery sprint up my spine. She never even turned to look at me when she spoke, she just stared at the window. When she finally turned to me, she just shook her head no slowly and left. Just walked out of the party and went home. Weird thing was there was so many people in the basement. Nobody else saw anything and most people suggested I was just fucked up. One of those times I wish I wasn't sober so I could let it go. The girl never wanted to talk about it for a long time. Ended up seeing her years later and brought it up. She got the same damn look on her face and said she must have just hallucinated it. When I was a kid I went to visit some family friends at a rental house down on the shoreline. Was a private golf cart / gated style community on the beach. We spent a beautiful day having fun as kids cause my best friend was there. The fun continues into the evening and I discover multiple bikes of theirs, so me and my best friend decide to go out and explore the community. It was rather large and I loved riding bikes around new places. She and I hopped on and rode around. So we discover a cemetery. Being kids we decided to just poke around for fun. The cemetery closed at 7:30 p.m. and it was just after 7. We read some headstones and noticed a lot of them were really old. At this point there is not a sound besides our footsteps and we quietly admire the headstones. The air is completely still at nighttime slowly settles in. We hear crashing through the bushes, something across the graveyard is in the hedgerow. A deer dives full sprint out of it and dives over a headstone splitting it into two. It knocked into it with its legs. Then runs off. At this point my best friend is scarred, she wanted to leave but I convinced her to go check out that damaged grave. We cross over the graveyard and she and I look at the cracked stone. Surprisingly nothing spooky happens yet. Until we looked over from where the deer was spooked from. There was a headstone very close to where the deer exited the hedges in its mad dash. See, almost all of the stones had these tiny American flags stuck in the dirt near them. As we approach closer to this headstone we notice something is very not right. The flag on this stone was swaying in a very bizarre manner. It was almost as if it was doing a sideways figure 8, slowly swaying up to the right, around, down to the left, and back again. No breeze. No moving air. No sound. No other flag moving, not any other of the 100 American flags were moving. My best friend is ready to run. She's spooked really bad at this point. I tell her to just stay, I'm gonna go touch the flag. I wanted to see if somehow there was a localized breeze only in this one flag, which was unlikely cause it was the stillest summer day ever. She begged me not to but I convinced her to just stand behind me. I inch toward the flag, closer and closer. It continues the weird waving motion. I get about 4 feet away and outstretch my arm to it slowly. My arm gets about 2 feet from the flag. It goes completely limp, and falls down to its post like all the others. We sprint back to our bikes and haul ass back to the vacation home. She and I are white-faced in panic riding as fast as possible. The guard shows up at 7:30 and sees us scarred kids leaving. Back at the house we tell some of the people in the community what we saw. Apparently lots of strange things have been happening there and many people have reported bizarre encounters around that area. I never went back to that community. This happened a few years ago, but it still freaks me out. I was visiting my mother. She lives in a rural area surrounded by cornfields and the nearest neighbor is a 15-minute drive away. My mom goes out on a date during my visit and I'm in her house alone at night, not too spooky and I'm a man damn it, so I don't scare easy. It's late at night 11 or midnight and mom's not coming home as she's had too much to drink so I'm alone until tomorrow. I settle in and I'm watching late night TV when out of nowhere something just starts beating on the living room wall from the outside. I'm freaking the hell out. Mostly because the house is elevated and where the beating was sounding was at least 8 or 9 feet of the ground. I'm talking violent bashing of the wall. There's a front window but I don't dare look out of it, I don't want to know what's out there. I dash to the bathroom and lock the door, for whatever the hell good that will do. The battering continues for around an hour and can hear it moving around the house. Wham! 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 Over and over until it just stops and there's silence. I spent the night in the bathtub, wide awake and hoping like hell whatever it was didn't come back. My parents visited part of the family who lived in the state of Sao Paulo when I was a kid and we stayed there for a week or two. We're traveling back at night by car and returned to Rio de Janeiro in just a few minutes after we started the trip. They noticed a bunch of people by the sides of the road and they soon realized they were thieves of some kind. They turned on the car inside light and called me to the front seat so as they were able to see me inside and maybe to facilitate our eventual escape. When the car got close to where they were, I clearly saw them and there were like more than 4 people by each side of the road, men and women and some young people as well, and they were really holding some sort of gun-like objects while all of them were staring in the direction cars come from. For our lucky, they decided not to do anything and weirdly signalized with clear hand gestures that we could pass. It was really quick and soon we stopped thinking about it, and maybe someone didn't have the same luck, or they weren't even holding guns nor anything and we felt like they were dangerous or something like that. I say so because in another similar experience my father and I played the opposite role as we were going from our city to Rio at night to drive my brother there, and we had a flat tire in the middle of a sierra. We didn't have a spare tire, neither smartphones nor road phones back then, none of them were common items, so my adult brother went running back to the city, as we had just started the trip, to call for help while we waited there by the car. We then armed ourselves with sticks and large stones and stood next to the car by the road as if we're thieves ourselves to avoid a car that tried to stop by. We thought the hole could have been some kind of trap or something like that. Later, a woman driving alone had the same problem and stopped at the same sport weir, and we waited there together for like more than an hour till the rescue service arrived, along with my mother and brother and even an aunt of mine, I guess. The tires were replaced, they went back to the city, and we three followed the trip. To travel at night in the 90s here in Brazil was strange. Backstory that makes it more weird: I grew up on old farmland that we had strong evidence that it once was Indian burial ground. Evidence to include numerous arrowheads and other things. As well as two terrain features rarely occur near each other. The appearance of the two features together was considered sacred by some tribes, and they would bury their dead at the location. All the farmers in the land surround our farm had places they would not dig or plow and were adamant about by disturbing the woods or venturing in them at night. In the dark you have the inexplicable feeling of being watched and an urgent need to get indoors as far as you can. Weird thing one thing I experienced was supposedly known to previous occupants as well. According to more than one family and spanning multiple generations, they all tell a story about a ghost you can hear walking up the inside steps of the house when you're home alone, and it is said that as long as you stay upstairs the ghost will leave you alone and not bother you. Some night when I was alone I decided to go to bed before my parents got back. As I was getting in bed I heard the sound of someone loudly walking up the stairs, which were conveniently right outside my room. I rushed out and turned the lights on and saw nothing. Tried to get back in bed and heard the same thing. Now quite obviously spooked, I went upstairs and turned on the TV. No more steps were heard. From that night on I stayed upstairs when home alone or slept with headphones, and still do to this day even after moving out. Weird thing too, one night when alone and doing my ritual of putting my headphones to drown out the annoying stare ghosty if it wanted to bitch and make racket, I felt really weird, like something was off. It felt like it did when you were outside at night on our land, really freaky. I was disturbed but decided to try and ignore it, so I laid down to go to sleep. I was rudely awakened some time later when something loud woke me, that I would later find out was something knocked off the hearth in my room. I sat bolt upright and almost jumped out of bed but stopped as I realized I wasn't alone. Something was floating at the foot of my bed. It was some sort of figure basked in what I can only describe as a black glow, wearing a black hooded cloak that concealed all except skeletal hands and the red eyes glowing like coals beneath the hood. I stared at the figure, too scared to even scream or move for fear of inciting it to action. All the figure did was glide a bit closer to me and extend its arm and point down at me. It didn't speak or make a sound, all it did was point down and look down at me with glowing red eyes. And then it just seems to fade away. I obviously didn't sleep the rest of the night. I later told my grandmother about it, as she had some weird knowledge of occult things, and all she would say was that I had been visited and marked by death. And that's why I don't fuck with supernatural shit. This whole thing took place when I was 17 years old and lasted around 6 to 7 months. I was sleeping over at a friend's house when the first experience happened. I was woken up early in the morning by talking. We were sleeping in the same bed, so I figured she was on the phone with her boyfriend or something. I turn over to her wanting to tell her to be quiet, and she's not on her phone. She's still asleep, no big deal, I know she sleep talks, so that's what it must have been. Suddenly she wakes up and points at the corner of the room. I ask her what, and she tells me it's there, standing in the corner, it's all black, and then immediately falls asleep. I was scared but brushed it off as sleep talking, or maybe she saw one of her cats because she had 3 black cats. But then it started as a feeling in my house. I would be in my kitchen and suddenly I'm aware that someone is staring at me. All the windows and blinds would be drawn, but I would just brush it off because there was obviously no one there. I started getting really uncomfortable with my parents' room. I would be constantly aware when it was open and feel the need to run and close it. At this point I thought I was going crazy because I would get random feelings of someone standing watching me even in my empty living room or bedroom. Around 1 month and I started having really intense dreams. All of them took place in my house and were extremely detailed. The first one was me standing in my kitchen. It was midday, so the sun was still filling the house with light. My kitchen has a clear view into the living room in the front of the house. I'm standing in the kitchen when suddenly I feel it, that uncomfortable and scared feeling I get when I'm awake. I turn over to where I think I feel the staring is coming from, and I see something. It's this big, tall pitch black shadow standing in the middle of my living room. It was around 7 feet tall and an almost human silhouette. After that dream, the feelings I would get became more and more frequent and intense. I remember one night really well. I was terrified. I was standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I got the feeling again. I right away thought of my parents' bedroom. I left it open and it was down the hall. At this point I figured their room was somehow connected to this, and I kept it closed whenever my parents weren't home. So, I stood there in front of the sink and I couldn't move. I got goosebumps all over my body and I couldn't make myself turn and face the open bathroom door that led to the hallway to my parents' bedroom. I started talking to it. As crazy and schizophrenic as this might seem, I yelled at it to leave me alone. And stood there for a couple of more minutes before it felt like I was released from that feeling. That night I had the worst nightmare of my life. It started as me standing in my bedroom and I felt it get cold. And guys, I actually felt the cold. In my dream the temperature was so low and it felt so real, as if I was awake. As I'm standing there frozen from fear, I feel this thing come up to me again. I can't begin to explain how terrified I felt. My eyes are shut because I'm too scared to open them and see what it is, but I feel its cold breath on my face. I started praying. I started yelling and cursing it and telling it it's not welcomed. I'm not really a religious or spiritual person, but in my dream this seemed like the only logical way to get rid of it. And then it just poofed away. The room went back to normal temperature and I was standing there alone. I heard my sister screaming downstairs in the kitchen, so I ran to her. I ran down the stairs, past the living and dining room and into the kitchen. The thing was dragging her by her hair on the floor, and I remember fighting it and trying to pull her free. I managed to get her free and pushed her into my grandparents' room. My grandpa had passed 3 years earlier, but I always felt safe in his presence, and my mind figured she would be safe there. As I finished getting her in the room, I hear my dog crying/yelping really loud. I run out from the room into the dining room and see my dog getting dragged by its tail up the stairs. I started crying and I was terrified, but I tried to run after them both. As soon as I made the first step, it let my dog go and I heard its footsteps as it ran up the last couple of steps, down the hall, and shut itself in my parents' bedroom. I woke up crying hysterically. Both of my parents ran into my room to try and calm me down. I told them it was the black shape, the black figure. My dad even thought I saw someone trying to break into my bedroom because of how I was crying. After I calmed down a bit and was able to explain everything that had happened, my mom decided to bless/cleanse the whole house. She's pretty religious, so I let her do what she felt was needed. She blessed each room in the house with holy water and sage. I still had 4 more very vivid and disturbed dreams after that. They all took place in my house and with the same shadow figure, and I was now scared of the dark and being home alone due to the feeling of something watching me. The last night of this whole experience ended in a dream. I was standing downstairs in my living room and I feel the same cold air/force push past me and run up the stairs into my bedroom. I hear things getting torn up and thrown, so I run upstairs after it. I notice all of my religious pictures and rosary, all stuff from my communion. I actually did have these items placed in real life exactly where they were in the dream, are destroyed and laying on the floor. I walk over to my parents' room because I see the lights are on. My mom is sitting on the bed and comes up to me as I walk in and she tells me that it's okay, it's finally gone. Ever since then I haven't had a feeling or dream about it. I also don't really believe in ghosts or anything like that. But this experience was really mentally draining. Over those couple of months I changed a lot, and it's crazy to look back and see how much it messed me up. I know this sounds weird. Last week me and my dad stayed up till 2 a.m, we were both in the kitchen. And we suddenly heard footsteps running upstairs. It was so alive we thought it was just the neighbors next door, but who the fuck runs like that in the middle of the night? And my dad said, "Hear that? That's a child running." Damn goosebumps while typing this. I told him, it must be the neighbors. Nights went by, it does the same thing up till now, every 1 to 2 a.m, or nighttime, someone's fucking running on our second floor, coming from the bedroom. My dad's sister, who used to live in our house before us, admitted they have experienced real shit going on around the house. My mom, who used the bathroom when I was 4 years old, it was power shortage, so no lights. She waited for so long waiting for someone to go out because she really needed to pee. By the sounds and looks of it, someone was using the bathroom, flushes, water drips, and even interactions to bathroom utensils. Minutes went by and the power finally went back. She couldn't wait, so she knocked forcefully as she really needed to use the bathroom. The knock was so hard it opened the bathroom door. No one was in there. My aunt, dad's sister, also claimed to have heard the footsteps upstairs, like someone's playing and running. Family members who visited and guests as well. Then this happened about 7 months ago. My mom, I think sometimes get sleep paralysis, but this paralysis of her is real fucking weird. So we were in the living room, all four of us, me, mum, dad, and my sister. She was 1 year old that time. My dad was using the computer. I was in the sofa and my mom was sleeping on the other sofa. My sister's playing on the floor. My mom's expressions while sleeping is like her eyes going up wide and she was having this weird grilly and she was shaking. I woke her up, and she asked if my sister is okay. Me and my dad stopped doing what we were doing and asked what happened. She said, she saw my little sister playing with someone, not me nor my dad, but with a little boy. Me and my dad were like, probably a nightmare. But what really freaked us out was, she knows exactly what we were doing. She described everything. I was on the sofa with my phone, my dad using the computer and stuff like that. This is not the first time it happened. The second time it happened was last month of April 2018. Again in the living room, she was sleeping, I'm watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and my sister's running around and playing like a normal kid would do, and she got my mom's earrings. My mom suddenly acted all weird again, giggling and eyes going white. I think she was having a nightmare, so I woke her up. She said, "Your sister got my earrings, take it, she might swallow it." I was like, what? I checked my sister's hands and she got the earrings. I asked her what happened. She told me, the boy, again. I think all of these are connected. I don't want to go upstairs now. One time, as I was driving home from work, I turned onto the street where I live on and noticed what seemed to be more street lights than I remember being there. I didn't think much of it at all at first, but something in me made me do a double take. I noticed that the 3 additional street lights are not street lights at all, but lights lined up perfectly in the sky in the distance. Literally, as soon as I noticed this, the lights in the sky beginning moving slowly and getting closer together. Eventually, they were close enough and formed a triangle. Mind you, at this point I have managed to park my car in my driveway and I'm standing there staring at them. My parents, who are fairly religious, tend not to believe in aliens, UFOs or anything of the sort, so I decided to run inside and get them so they can see this for themselves. We go back outside, the lights are still hovering, moving slowing in a triangle. No sound is being made by them. They do this for a few more seconds and all of a sudden, one of them speeds off super quickly. When I say quick, I mean quick. The remaining 2 continue moving slowly in the sky for a few more seconds, then they literally just vanish. Poof, the lights were just gone. I'm not saying it was aliens, but yeah, those really were unidentified flying objects. To this day, we have no idea what they might possibly be.